gentlemen, in the name of the Hellenic Society and the Ethical Finance Society, please let me warmly welcome you here tonight to our first event of the year. To begin with, before we start our event, I would like to briefly introduce you to the event and thank, of course, our speakers, Mrs. Bacogyannis and Mr. Kefalogiannis, who flew all the way from Greece here tonight to talk to us, as well as Mr. Vasiliou and our honorary president of the Ethical Finance Society, Mr. Ravas, who came with the guests, as well as Mr. Nikolaidis, the president of the Hellenic Society, and all those who assisted him in organizing the event today. And most of all, Mrs. Delacour, who is chairing the event from the side of the LSE. Now, the event, very briefly, will be an introduction by Mr. Kefalogiannis and a short speech, and then a speech by Mrs. Bacogyannis, and a 15-20 minute Q&A session coordinated by Mr. Delacour. So, without further ado, please help me warmly introduce Mr. Kefalogiannis, parliamentary spokesperson for the New Democracy Party in Greece.
Thank you all for being here today. So allow me for the economy of speech to be somewhat paradoxical in the beginning. And since Mrs. Bacogyanni will speak about populism in Europe and nationalism, start telling you my views and my ideas on the definition of populism. From my point of view, populism is first and foremost an ideology. One that considers society divided into two groups, homogeneous and antagonistic. The pure people on the one side and the corrupt elite on the other side. And against this background, politics should be an expression of the general will of the people. Now, in determining who the people and who the elite is, another ideology comes into play, which could be termed as a host ideology in which populism is attached to it. For the right, this ideology is usually a version of nationalism, authoritarianism, or nativism. And for the left, it usually constitutes another version of socialism. And my opinion is that we cannot possibly comprehend the right-wing populism unless we consider one version of nationalism or nativism. In the same vein, we cannot possibly comprehend the Syriza or Podemos parties in Spain unless we consider one version of socialism. What populism does, as described above, is to pervade these ideologies, attributing them a moralistic aura. In this sense, the divide between the people and the elite is not social or geographical anymore. It is purely a moral one. And I think that we all understand that if populists express the voice of all the people, the so-called vox populi, then according to them, any politician adopting a different attitude to populists practically serves particular domestic or foreign interests. They constitute the enemy of the elite. This in turn helps us gain a better understanding of the following. First, the reasons for the creation of a polarized political culture by the populists all over Europe, and second, the reasons for the elimination of the word compromise in populists' political rhetoric and practice. For them, compromise equals the corruption of the people, and therefore it is to be rejected in its every form. And the first question to be posed: do the aforementioned attributes of populism entail the negation of democracy as its critics claim? The answer is no. Populism does not negate democracy. It advocates both popular sovereignty and majority rule. In my opinion, it is wrong to label the populist parties as non-democratic ones. A small but useful parenthesis here: the party of Golden Dawn does not constitute just a populist party. The Golden Dawn party in Greece is an anti-democratic, far-right extremist, racist party, the most noteworthy in Europe at the moment, and therefore it should be treated differently to the populist parties. Ideologically speaking, the counterpower of populism in Europe has a name, and that name is liberal democracy. what I really think populism articulates today is a bigoted, illiberal democratic response to issues raised by the liberalization of Western societies. A second question to be posed along the lines of this discussion is to what extent the populist parties benefit in times of financial crisis. And the answer, as I've been before you, is that the financial crisis favors the emerging of populist parties only in short term. Generally speaking, experience gained from elections is indicative of a voter tendency towards the more traditional parties and the more seasoned politicians in periods of financial instability. If we look closely at the recent electoral confrontations in a range of financially stable European countries, we can easily attribute the positive results of populist parties in elections to the promotion of a circumstance-favored agenda dealing with issues such as immigration in Germany, European integration in the British referendum, terrorism in France, and the corruption of the elite in Italy. Still, all these issues have been in the core of the populist right wing ever since the 70s. So why is populism on the rise now today? I will briefly mention 3 reasons, showcasing some important factors concerning the offer and the demand for populist politics. The first reason is that a big part of the European electoral body believes that important issues are not sufficiently addressed by the traditional elite. The traditional parties seem to ignore that populists often ask the right questions but give the wrong answers. The established parties refuse to include the problems such as immigration, terrorism, multiculturalism, and European integration in their electoral programs. This has created a wide political discontent, constituting fertile ground for the emergence of populist parties. And in this light, I do not consider Mr. Macron's electoral success incidental, who opted for the European issue to feature predominantly on his electoral campaign. Nor do I consider incidental the less than expected success of the Christian Democrats, as well as the failure of the Social Democrats in Germany, who spoke less and more vaguely about the immigration issue than the AfD. The second reason why populism has succeeded is the consolidation of a perception that practically equates all the national political elites, treating them as identical. And I will not elaborate on this, but the convergence in the past 20 years on significant cultural and financial issues has alienated a big portion of voters from the political party base, depriving them of their political voice. And this cleavage is partly covered by the populist parties. Third reason, a significant percentage of the European voters regards the national elites as practically powerless. The traditional parties have not been successful in handling the impressive delegation of power from the national level to the European level recorded in the past 30 years, both communicatively and in principle. Receiving confusing messages from the traditional elites, who either claim to be powerless when implementing unpopular policies, or that they are in absolute control in case of popular policies, people come to the conclusion that they are being cheated by the political elites. And this simplistic but clear political message and speech of the populist parties provides them with a safe shelter. And I will close my brief introduction to Mrs. Bacoghianni's speech with just a few words about the Greek version of populism enacted by Syriza and ANEL, independent Greeks in Greece. Syriza, and to a lesser extent the Podemos in Spain, have reminded Europe that populism is not only a far right-wing, nationalistic and xenophobic phenomenon, it can well be articulated by the left wing. And in my opinion, attributing the electoral success of Syriza to the financial crisis is partially right. Other countries have been in the throes of financial crisis and memoranda of understanding without giving rise to a left-wing populist party electoral success, such as in Cyprus, or in Spain, Ireland, or even Portugal. Second, this approach fails to account for two more issues. Firstly, the virtually unproblematic coalition government of Syriza and independent Greeks, which is a far-right-wing nationalistic and xenophobic party. And secondly, the fact that even today, after the memorandum approach and the disattainment of its promises, Syriza retains in opinion polls percentages of about 20, which is multiples of its 3 to 4 pre-crisis percentages. If there is a lesson to be learned from the Greek experience pertaining to populism, is that nationalism does not constitute the exclusive privilege of the right wing, but it can well be articulated by a left-wing party. The other way around still comes true. Neither social claims anti-austerity are an exclusive privilege of left-wing populism, and as clearly shown in an else case, right-wing populism may also appropriate social claims. And this phenomenon is well known to political scientists. It is called national populism, with Peronism in Argentina as its typical example. So the Greek version of national populism sums up in 3 elements. First, the construction of a non-class-based but intersocial, patriotically minded collectivity, the people, who appropriate a denunciatory discourse. Second, the consolidation of a new cleavage in Greek politics, based not only in the traditional axis right-left, but memorandum and anti-memorandum, which is now quite outdated. And third, and the most important of all, a nationalistic orientation of the political and social protest. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you will find my reflections useful as an introduction to Mrs. Ντόρα Μπακογιάννι's really interesting address on populism and nationalism in Europe. And it is my firm belief that she is the most suitable person for this, as during her term of office as minister, she had to deal with a very demanding agenda pertaining to issues of populism and nationalism. And I do not need to remind you that among many others, it is mainly thanks to her that we can now speak about a comprehensive national strategy in Greece on the name issue with Skopje. Nor do I need to remind you, back then, that there were neither rallies nor petty political party objectives pursued in such a confidential political environment as we're witnessing today. And this happened because Mrs. Ντόρα Μπακογιάννη not only paved the way for the positive impact the resolution of this issue may have on a national level in terms of public opinion, but she also brought into public dialogue a new understanding of foreign policy on the basis of national interests and not just the declaration of national rights. And finally, let me draw your attention to the stance she opted on a crucial moment in the political life of Greece when the country was entering the memorandum era and the scene was dominated by populist discourse. She put the national interest before and above her personal political interests. And on this note, I wish to welcome to the floor Ms. Bacoghianni and to publicly thank her for the excellent cooperation we had for almost 1 year, where under her guidance I was dealing with foreign affairs in my party. Thank you.
Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it's both a pleasure and an honor to be here tonight, and I would like to thank the LSE Hellenic Society and its students for a kind invitation. I chose the topic, in my opinion, of great importance, nationalism and populism, because they are gaining soil across Europe. They exploit the openness of our societies that has guaranteed democracy and peace in a united Europe ever since the disastrous Second World War. In order to dominate the present, they distort this historical success that once sought to make Europe immune to the populist core of fascism and communism. Nationalism and populism can appear in different forms today. but the pattern remains largely the same. They use social grievances over contemporary crises to attack the liberal democratic consensus that stands in the way to power. Two recent subsequent crises, the global economic crisis and the migration crisis, provided ample ammunition for such attacks across very different societies and economies, but with a comparable result, the rise of populist parties. France, the Netherlands, Austria, Sweden, Greece and Germany are some of the European states where populists have achieved breakthroughs and great electoral gains. Greece was the first, of course, to experience the very rise to power of the populist scheme, Syriza and ANEL, in 2015. In a way, the country became a political laboratory of European trends. Alexis Tsipras was the first populist prime minister across the EU. He promised to get rid of 2 bailout agreements, and he finally signed the third one, without even believing in the reforms. I must note, however, that his left-wing populism differs from the right-wing populism that is particularly strong in Central and Northern Europe. Due to its link with nationalism, populism cannot turn into an international movement, but it already poses a common problem for democracies. Western elites have been slow to recognize the threat that arises from the neglect of social inequalities, or sometimes the light-hearted legitimization of populist agendas by democratic pluralistic parties. When pragmatism unavoidably returns, more authentic champions of populism take up these agendas and effectively question the legitimacy of the established political parties. No doubt, traditional parties take a share of the blame for the rise of populism, as they have taken a liberal democratic consensus for granted and have underestimated the need for modern cleavages in political competition. Populists seek to fill in this vacuum with convenient artificial cleavages that make them look modern and refreshing vis-à-vis dated competitors, new and old, elites and people, systematic, anti-systematic, pro-European and anti-European, liberal and anti-globalization. That was what helped Farage, Le Pen, Wilders and other European populists find an audience. They wanted Europe to be a mosaic of states instead of an integrated commonwealth with a shared currency and open borders. They wanted for Europe to look like it did before the grand experiment of integration. I will quote Nigel Farage, whom everybody, of course, in this room knows. What we have tried to do in Europe is go against all the trends globally. Globally, the world is breaking down into smaller units. The desire to reverse that trend shows Europe's complete lack of understanding of how human beings operate. In the world of Farage and his allies, people gravitate more towards tribal notions of identity rather than principles of integration. Allow me not to refer to the British referendum, as we may talk about this during the discussion, but we have to admit that British voters succumbed to the populist leaders' rhetoric. The irony is that the country that was least affected by migration crisis is the one where we have seen the most consequential political backlash. Anti-immigrant populist parties have existed in Europe since the 60s, but they have mainly operated on the margins of politics. Today, many European countries have at least one populist party in their parliament. These parties reframe the political agenda through extreme, nativist and nationalist themes. However, it would be a mistake to to see them as simply the heirs of Europe's far-right nationalism. Unlike the fascist parties in the interwar Europe, these are not anti-system actors. They do not reject the constitutional order, as Giannis already said. Instead, they start as protest groups, only to become contestants of power within the constitutional order. The problem is that in the meantime, they may drive millions of people to mass fantasies about returning to an idealized nationalist past, thus derailing democratic institutions and economic progress. The arrest of globalization in defense of national identity is therefore a very popular doctrine among populists. I firmly believe that many anti-immigrant parties have developed a new political discourse which I would describe as civilizationism. This is a paradoxical combination of nationalism, secularism, and Islamophobia, and even some elements of liberalism, such as support of gender equality or gay rights. It initiates a pan-European civilizational identity, which is at the same time nationalistic, secular, and incompatible with Islam. Populists have turned religion into a matter of belonging rather than believing. Moreover, they claim that they represent the real people. In a nativist sense, they love threat and danger scenarios in order to spread fear, and they arbitrarily define scapegoats. Ladies and gentlemen, there are four main factors contributing to the rise of populist and nationalist parties in Europe. First, the migration crisis. Although some of us were urging Europe to react, the latter reacted only after thousands of refugees started arriving. Moreover, European leaders have only agreed upon a sketchy solution, closing the Western Balkan route, as if Greece could host all these desperate refugees. Migration is likely to remain an overarching theme in European politics. It was at the heart of the British referendum campaign, and it dominated all the elections across Europe. On one side stand liberal internationalists attached to fundamental asylum principles, and the idea was of a borderless world, and on the other side, xenophobic fence builders regarding migration as a modern version of barbaric invasions. At the same time, Islamic terrorism helps populists to express a rhetoric that is generally opposed to all Muslims, even if they left their homes in order to find a safe shelter. Therefore, along with the refugee crisis, post-truth politics have emerged. Videos produced by populists depict fantasies of Europe before and after the migration. The before situation is depicted with an orderly scenes of the 60s, where an all-white population lives and strolls happily. The after situation shows groups of dark men attacking women and policemen by shouting Allah Akbar. To sum up, the failure of the European leadership to agree upon an effective common migration policy allows populists to gain political support. Second, the global nature of current challenges, changes in the labor market, increased socio-economic inequalities, and globalization have left traditional political parties with little policy control on a national level. Problems that previously could be solved on a country level are now more difficult to overcome due to their transnational character and their interdependent decision-making systems between nations. As a result, many political parties are seen by the public as being unable to solve the pressing problems. This perceived lack of political decision-making and political vacuum has given space to populists and nationalist forces which persuade people that they better represent their true concerns. To my opinion, traditional parties have to engage in soul-searching in order to understand how and why they lost touch with their traditional supporters. Third, the rise of both perceived and real socio-economical inequalities that followed the current financial and economic crisis, unbalanced globalization, and the so-called fourth industrial revolution. Outsourcing of manufacturing jobs to low-wage countries, an aging population, increased unemployment, and technological advancements requiring highly skilled professionals have widened the gap between the rich and the poor. Let me take an example. Even Sweden, which was traditionally a symbol of socio-economic equality, has seen a widening income gap, which has contributed to an increased perception of a divided society. The nationalist right-wing party of Sweden Democrats quickly capitalized on this sentiment by linking it to migration, managed to attract both left-wing and right-wing voters. Similarly, in France, Le Pen used increased socio-economic inequality as one of her main arguments against the effectiveness of traditional parties, thereby profiling herself as fighter against the establishment. Fourth, some new populist political parties and movements often start and gain support by being predominantly single-issued parties. Some are against migration, some against globalization, others against the European Union. By doing so, they can easily attract and channel people's dissatisfaction with the current state of affairs. In contrast, established parties have sought to provide a complete set of political solutions for society, often guided by ideological conviction. In today's society, where opinions and solutions are sometimes expressed by a short post on Facebook or an even shorter on a tweet, the detailed programs of political parties have proven to deter rather than to attract voters. Ladies and gentlemen, today's political change poses three particular challenges for the EU. One is the struggle for power between the old and the new. The constellation of power in Brussels is still that of the old establishment. Drawing the anger of new forces, the EU's supranational institutions lack the legitimacy and the robustness that national institutions have by virtue as parts of nation states. The second challenge is the functioning of the EU. Rapid change makes the Union harder to govern because the political system depends on transnational cooperation. Transnational cooperation needs time. The third threat is against Europe's symbolic role. This ideological opposition comes from several directions. For an anti-austerity movement, Brussels is the enforcer of fiscal rules that strangle their welfare states. For anti-globalization protesters, Europe is an agent of trade liberalization and a friend of multinationals. For extreme conservatives, the Union stands for the rights of minorities. Populism combines easily with Euroscepticism because it is inherently against the idea of supranational authority that overrides people's will. Typically, populist movements are headed by charismatic leaders who claim to represent the majority versus the elite. They often have few detailed political goals and gain support through digestible mottos. Ladies and gentlemen, populism and nationalism is the dark side of Europe. They are, in my opinion, the biggest threats of democracy. Populists and nationalists see liberal democracy and its values as the root cause of the so-called national degradation. They oppose both Europe's goals and working methods. They claim that interdependence is dangerous and that national sovereignty should be absolute, supporting majority rule and rejecting pluralism. They threaten Europe's health. National politics might catch a populist cold, but Europe gets pneumonia for sure. To strengthen our immune system, we need more resilience around our core values and more flexibility to adapt to this changing world. Nationalism and populism pose such a threat to the European Union because European integration is a political, liberal, democratic project, not a territorial treaty. Our institutions are not self-evidently necessary in the way that national ones are. Nation states can change their ideological directions. Europe cannot. If the Union abandons the core values, it loses the raison d'etre. It cannot pull up its roots of liberalism and interdependence. Therefore, Europe should find ways to modify herself according to new methods of doing politics. European leaders should challenge the populist message and in particularly press these firebrands to provide details about their policy proposals. Populists are big on divisive rhetoric, but vague when it comes to what they would actually do about immigration, economy, or national security. Challenging them to get specific will highlight the inconsistencies for voters and show that many populist policy proposals would likely prove ineffective in practice. Then, of course, European leaders must provide real solutions to the problems that are pushing a large number of their citizens towards populist parties. The region urgently needs to take concrete steps toward reducing unemployment and promoting economic growth. For example, on tax evasion, corruption, and inequality, the EU needs to show that it is on the side of the citizens rather than the elites or the big businesses. Our goal is to maintain Europe as a wide and open society for the sake of Europeans and all those people that chose our continent as their homeland. In order to reach this goal, we have to agree what Europe means. Prosperity and stability were not given when Robert Schuman paved the way for a united Europe. Today, after 7 decades of progress and cooperation, we face again the very same challenge. Migration, financial and social crisis should work as an awakening call. We have to remember and reassert our identity and values. We need to remind you, the younger, what we have achieved since the war. To remember and remind them that Europeans in all countries are committed to showing and offering respect, that their power is derived from working together, that the national interest can often be well served through European solidarity, and invest in building up the solidarity that was badly harmed through the recent crisis. We cannot afford to compromise our democratic achievements and see Europe get caught in the claws of populism. Allow me to refer to the great poet John Donne. No man is an island entire on itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Moreover, Einstein said that the rarest thing in the world is common sense. It is crucial to realize in times that we have to sacrifice short-sighted national interests in order to protect our common future. We, including the United Kingdom, that decided to leave the European Union, are all parts of the same continent and of the same ideal of the West. Let's act immediately in order to empower democratic institutions that can keep it safe for the next generations and set a new paradigm for the world. We cannot lose more time. Thank you very much.
Now I would like to thank all of you for coming and seeing these speeches. I would very much like to thank both our speakers as well as Ms. Talakura for convening this. I hope you all really enjoyed this. This was our first event of a discussion series we're going to be holding for the next month. Our next event will be on the 22nd of February with Mr. Psalidopoulos, the Greek representative of to the IMF. We hope you can join us again. Thank you very much.